When people talk about autism, there's often an assumption underneath the conversation that autism is something separate from the person, something that needs to be understood, managed, or treated, something that sits alongside who someone is rather than being woven through it. But for many autistic people, myself included, that framing misses something fundamental. Autism isn't just a diagnosis, it isn't just a set of traits on a checklist. For many of us, it's a core part of who we are. It shapes how we think, how we experience the world, how we connect with others, and what we find meaningful, and how we move through our lives. When we start to understand autism as identity, it changes a lot of things. It changes what support looks like and what community looks like. It even changes how we understand our own stories. And that's what today's video is about. We're going to explore autistic identity, what it is, how it forms, why language matters so much to our community, and why so many of us need to actively rewrite the stories we've been given about what it means to be autistic. So let's start with something that might seem like a small thing, but is actually deeply significant. And we're going to talk about why language matters, particularly identity first versus person first language. If you've spent any time around autism conversations in schools, healthcare, organizations, you'll almost certainly have heard the phrase person with autism. This is called person first language, and it was developed with the intention of centering the humanity of disabled people, separating the person from their disability. The thinking went, the person comes first, not the label. I want to be clear. That intention wasn't bad. It came from a genuine desire to push back against dehumanizing ways of talking about disabled people. But here's the thing. The autistic community, particularly autistic self-advocates, has by and large pushed back on person-first language when it comes to autism. And that pushback is worth understanding because it isn't arbitrary. Identity first language, saying autistic person rather than person with autism, reflects something that many of us feel deeply. Autism isn't separate from who we are. You can't take it out of us or set it aside from us. It isn't something we carry alongside our personhood. It's woven into our cognition, our sensory experience, our way of embodying ourselves in the world. When we say person with autism, there's an implication, however unintentional, that autism is something problematic enough that it needs to be linguistically distanced from the person, that it's a burden to be separated from rather than a part of who someone is. This doesn't mean that autism doesn't bring real challenges, it does. But those challenges are often significantly shaped by a world that isn't designed for us, not by autism itself. And for many autistic people, our neurotype, our neurocognitive style, is a source of strength, connection, meaning, and culture. It connects us to a community. It's a part of how we understand ourselves. Of course, language preferences vary. Some autistic people do prefer person first language, and we should respect individual preferences. But when we're talking about community level advocacy and what most people, autistic people, tell us they prefer, identity first language is what the evidence and the community voice consistently reflects. Language is never just grammar. Language tells a story about how we see people, and our community has been pretty clear about the story it once told. So now I want to think about the ecosystem of autistic identity. How does autistic identity actually form? How do we come to understand ourselves as autistic? And how does that understanding get shaped? I want to use a framework here that I find really useful. Think of identity as something that isn't formed inside a person in isolation. It's formed within an ecosystem. It's built in relationship with the world around us at multiple different levels. At the outermost level, we have the broad cultural and political landscape, the dominant narratives about what autism is, the history of how autism has been defined, researched, and talked about, the policies that govern how autistic people are supported or not supported, in schools, workplaces, and healthcare systems. For most of the history of autism as a diagnostic category, those dominant narratives have been shaped almost entirely without meaningful autistic input. Autism was defined as deficit, as disorder, as something to be fixed. The research agenda was largely about causation and cure, not about quality of life, community, or flourishing. The cultural backdrop doesn't just exist out there in the abstract, it seeps into everything, into how schools talk to children, into what parents are told when their child is identified as autistic, into how autistic people see themselves. Moving inward at a community and institutional level, we have schools, healthcare systems, workplaces, local communities. Those are the spaces where abstract cultural narratives become lived experience. A child in a school where autism is framed as a problem to manage will have a very different experience of their own identity than a child in an environment where their neurocognitive style is understood as just difference, as equally valid, as a way of being. Closer in still, we have that level of immediate relationships: family, friends, teachers, support workers, peers, the people we grow up with, the people who reflect our identity back to us. If the people around you consistently frame your autistic traits as problems, as things to be corrected, hidden, or overcome, that shapes how you understand yourself. If the people around you have never met another autistic person they respect, never encountered an autistic adult living a good life on their own terms, that shapes the possibilities you're able to imagine yourself. And at the center of the ecosystem, there is you, your neurocognitive style, your sensory world, your way of thinking and connecting. But even this innermost experience doesn't exist externally from the ecosystem. It's interpreted, narrated, and understood through all of these different layers. And this is why autistic identity is so deeply a social and political phenomenon, not just a personal diagnostic one. The way we understand ourselves as autistic people is profoundly shaped by the world we're embedded in, and for many of us, that ecosystem has not been a kind one. And so I want to think about the stories we inherit. Most autistic people, particularly those of us who are diagnosed in childhood or who grew up in environments where autism was discussed, inherit a set of stories about what autism means. And those stories carry weight. Maybe the story was that autism is a tragedy, that it represents a loss for the family, for the person diagnosed, that the goal is to appear as non autistic as possible, that fitting in, passing, masking, these are the markers of success. Maybe the story was that autism exists on a spectrum from severe to mild, that you were sat on the spectrum where you were sat on the spectrum determined your worth, your potential, your future. Maybe the story was that autism is a disorder defined by social deficits, that autistic people lack empathy, struggle to connect, are fundamentally less capable of relationship and community. These stories aren't benign. They become the lens through which we understand ourselves, often long before we have the critical tools to question them. For many autistic people, particularly those who are late diagnosed, there's an even more complicated version of this. Years, sometimes decades of unexplained difference, of knowing something was different about how you experience the world, but not having the framework to understand it, of internalizing explanations that place the problem firmly within you, your personality, your effort, your willingness to try harder, fit in, be less. Late diagnosis often brings a profound reckoning with those inherited stories, because suddenly there's a different frame available, one that doesn't locate the problem in personal failing, but in the mismatch between a neurology and a world that wasn't designed for it. But having a new frame available doesn't automatically replace the old stories. That takes work, it takes time, and it takes something that many of us don't have easy access to: connection with other autistic people who have done that work. So, how do we rewrite the narrative? Rewriting the stories we've been given about autism isn't just an intellectual exercise, it's a process of identity reconstruction. It means looking at the narratives you've internalized, the ones about deficit, about dysfunction, and what it means to be autistic, and asking, Whose story is this? Who told it? What did they stand to gain from it? And does it match my actual lived experience? It means finding new frameworks like the social model of disability, which locates the problem not in the person but in the barriers created by society, or the neurodiversity paradigm, which understands neurological variation as a natural and valuable part of human diversity. These aren't just academic positions. For many autistic people, encountering these frameworks for the first time is genuinely transformative. It's the moment when the story shifts from what is wrong with me to what has the world got wrong about me. Rewriting also means grieving, because some of those old stories cause real harm. Years of masking, burnout, of working incredibly hard to meet a standard that was never designed with you in mind. That harm deserves acknowledgement, not minimization. And rewriting means building a sense of autistic identity that is yours, that honors the complexity and the challenges and the very real ways that life can be difficult, and that also holds space for the strengths, the community, the culture, and the particular kind of richness that autistic experience can hold. And so I want to circle back to the importance of community with identity. And I want to say something clearly. You cannot and should not rewrite these stories alone. Or rather, you might be able to begin the process alone, but identity is inherently relational. It forms in connection, and the reshaping of autistic identity almost always, most powerfully, happens in community with autistic people. This is why autistic community spaces matter so much, not just for practical support or information sharing, though those matter too, but because of what it means to be seen and recognized by people who share something fundamental about your experience of the world. When you find community with other autistic people, something shifts. The internalized shame starts to loosen. The questions you've been afraid to ask become askable. The experiences you thought were uniquely broken about you turn out to be shared. And the stories, the deficit narratives, the tragic framings start to look much less solid when you're surrounded by autistic people living full, complex, meaningful lives. This is what the autistic self-advocacy movement has always understood. The slogan, "Nothing about us without us," isn't just a political demand. It's an identity statement. We are the experts on our own experience, and our community is where that expertise is held, shared, and built upon. The ecosystem we live within shapes our identity, that's true, but we also have the capacity to shape our ecosystem, to seek out communities where autistic identity is understood with depth and nuance, to build relationships with people who reflect a story about autism that actually serves us, to participate in creating the culture we needed and didn't have. If anything in this video has resonated with you, if you recognize your own experience in any of those inherited stories, or in that journey of beginning to rewrite them, I want to make sure you know about two things. The first is our Restoring Autism course, which you can get as both a workbook and a video course. This course is built around exactly what we've been talking about today, the process of examining the narratives we've been given about autism, understanding where they come from, and doing the deep, meaningful work of constructing a new relationship with your autistic identity. It's thorough, it's grounded in the perspectives and voices of the autistic community, and it's designed to support you through that process. And the link is in the description below. The second is the NeuroHub online community space, because, as I've said, you can't do this work entirely alone. Community matters, and NeuroHub is a space built by and for neurodivergent people, where those conversations about identity and experience and belonging can happen with people who genuinely get it. Again, the link is in the description. If this video has been useful to you, please share it, because there are a lot of people out there who are still living inside stories about autism that don't serve them, and they deserve to find their way to a different one. Subscribe to stay connected with the channel and hit the notifications button, and make sure to pass this along to anyone who needs it. We'll keep exploring these ideas together, and I'll see you in the next one.